They say monsters don't exist. But on August 23, 2016, in a small apartment in Albuquerque, New Mexico, hell disguised itself as a home. That night, a girl barely 10 years old, Victoria Martens, was snatched from the world in the cruelest way imaginable. The neighborhood lights were still on, the children were sleeping, the dogs were barking, and no one knew that within those walls, one of the most disturbing stories in American criminal history was being written. A mother who remained silent, a stepfather with secrets, a friend with a rotten soul, and a fourth participant, a faceless ghost whose DNA still screams from the evidence. Was it a planned crime, a revenge ritual, or the result of a completely unhinged mind? The truth is darker than the police ever imagined, and as time passes, one question remains unanswered. Who really killed Victoria Martens? In the heart of the New Mexico desert, where the days are long and the nights seem eternal, there is a city that holds secrets behind its lights. Albuquerque, seemingly peaceful, has witnessed stories that chill the blood. But none like that of that little girl with a bright smile and life-filled eyes, Victoria Martens. Her story doesn't begin with a crime, but with a childhood that promised hope. She was barely 10 years old. She liked dolls, animals, and fairy tales. She was the kind of girl who greeted all her neighbors, who trusted the world, unaware that that same world was preparing to betray her. Victoria lived with her mother, Michelle Martens, in an ordinary apartment complex, one of those that seem safe but hide more than they reveal. Michelle was a single mother, her life marked by bad decisions and dangerous loves. She sought companionship in the wrong places, never imagining that one of those encounters would seal her daughter's fate. In the summer of 2016, Michelle met a man named Fabian Gonzalez. At first glance, he seemed kind, charming, and protective. But beneath that mask lay a past of violence, drugs, and deceit. Shortly after, Gonzalez's cousin Jessica Kelly entered the scene. An unpredictable woman recently released from prison, plagued by addictions and a troubled mind. And it was with those three names gathered under one roof that the tragedy began to unfold. For weeks, neighbors heard arguments, screams, and noises at odd hours. There was something strange about that house, a constant sense of tension. But no one imagined that hell was brewing behind those walls. The Department of Children, Youth and Families had already received multiple calls alerting them to possible abuse, neglect, and suspicious behavior in the Martens' home. Still, nothing changed. No one intervened in time. And so, August 23, 2016 arrived, the day Victoria turned 10. The morning began like any other. She had breakfast with her mother, went to school, and returned at dusk. She had mentioned wanting cake, balloons, a small party, but her birthday would end with sirens, smoke, and a scene no human being should ever witness. When the clock struck 11 at night, the police received an emergency call. Screams, the smell of burning, and a woman saying something terrible had happened. Upon arriving at the apartment, the officers pushed open the door, and the air became unbreathable. There was smoke, there was silence, and there was a story they would never forget. Inside the bathroom, amid the steam, they found a gruesome scene. The body of a little girl, partially wrapped in a burning blanket. Fragments of what had been her innocence scattered among towels, clothes, and blood. The officers, hardened by years of service, left the apartment in tears. It was a horror that cannot be described without feeling nausea, rage, or helplessness. That little girl was Victoria, and what had been done to her was beyond human understanding. For the first few hours, investigators thought it was a fit of rage. But the more they observed, the more they realized it had been planned, something inhumane. The autopsy would reveal fractures, wounds, and strangulation marks. But also something else. Contradictions. Because the story the mother told didn't match the evidence. Michelle Martens tearfully testified that her daughter had been drugged and sexually abused, that it had all happened in front of her, that she was powerless to stop him. She said it was Fabian himself who attacked her, with Jessica's help. But soon, the truth began to shatter that version. There were no traces of drugs on Victoria's body. There were no clear signs of a recent sexual assault. And the timing didn't add up. Neighborhood security cameras showed that Michelle and Fabian had left the apartment minutes before the crime occurred. Jessica, high on methamphetamine, was seen running barefoot down the hallway after the fire. But then, an even more disturbing piece of information emerged. Unknown male DNA found on the victim's body. A man who wasn't Fabian, a fourth participant. A ghost with an unknown name. Police began to suspect that what had happened that night was more complex than anyone imagined. Michelle, gripped by her own demons, admitted that she had allowed the men to abuse her daughter in exchange for drugs or money. A chilling confession that sent shockwaves across the country. But the line between truth and illusion began to blur. Her statements changed with each interrogation. Some seemed like fantasies induced by manipulation or fear. Others, cold and calculated. As the media swirled around the case, the community erupted in outrage. Marches, vigils, makeshift altars, photos of Victoria with flowers, candles, and letters pleading for justice. The entire city stopped for a moment, staring into the abyss left by a girl who should never have died like that. The first hearings were a spectacle of horror. Michelle seemed lost, almost numb, as if she didn't understand the magnitude of what had happened. Fabian kept his head down, showing no emotion. Jessica, on the other hand, laughed. A nervous, disturbing laugh that filled the courtroom with an even more uncomfortable silence. The prosecutors spoke of a crime committed in stages. First the assault, then the strangulation, then the mutilation. The details were so gruesome that some journalists left the room, but amid so much evidence and so many contradictory versions, no one could piece together the complete puzzle. The question remained alive, hovering like a shadow over each testimony. Who was really the murderer? Who held the rope that took Victoria Martens' life? The investigation continued for months. Experts pieced together Victoria's last night minute by minute. Forensic evidence pointed to the direct involvement of the three defendants, but also to someone else. An unknown man. A DNA trail that didn't match any of them. It was as if the crime had a piece that someone had taken care to erase, a piece that, without it, rendered everything meaningless. Meanwhile, the public demanded exemplary punishments. They wanted convictions. They wanted names. They wanted immediate justice. But the judicial system, caught between technicalities, procedural errors, and plea bargains, seemed to be going in the opposite direction. The mother, Michelle, accepted a plea deal. She admitted responsibility for child abuse resulting in death, avoiding a life sentence. Jessica Kelly did the same, reducing charges in exchange for testifying. Fabian Gonzalez was charged with negligence, tampering with evidence, and aiding and abetting, and the fourth participant disappeared into the shadows of the case files. The story became a moral conundrum, because in the end, everyone was guilty of something, but no one seemed completely guilty of everything. As the media published headlines, the streets of Albuquerque filled with murmurs. Neighbors, teachers, family, friends. Everyone was asking the same question. How could something so monstrous happen without anyone stopping it? Where were the authorities when the first alarm bells rang? Where was humanity when Victoria needed it most? As the months passed, the case ceased to be just news. It became a symbol, a story that exposed the failure of the system, child abandonment, and social indifference. And above all, the dark truth that monsters, sometimes, aren't hiding under the bed. The dawn of August 24, 2016 found Albuquerque plunged into silence. In the apartment complex where it all happened, the yellow crime tapes still fluttered in the sun. Behind those lines, detectives worked with red eyes and weary souls. The smell of smoke, the echo of screams, and the sight of a still wet bathtub were reminders that something had happened there that human language can barely describe. The news spread like wildfire. A 10-year-old girl murdered in her own home. The headlines read, "Atrocious, monstrous, inhuman." No one could explain how a mother, a man, and a woman had ended up involved in such barbarity. As investigators searched every corner of the apartment, they found traces of blood, pieces of children's clothing, and charred toys. The autopsy began that same morning, and the results shocked even the most experienced forensic experts. Victoria had been strangled. Her body showed multiple injuries, fractures, and signs of prior assault. But something else was striking. The mother's statements didn't match the evidence. Victoria Martens wept inconsolably during the interrogation. She said her daughter had been drugged before the attack, that she had watched her abused without being able to intervene. Her account was confusing, at times incoherent. She named Fabian Gonzalez and Jessica Kelly as directly responsible. But the toxicology test was clear. There were no traces of drugs in Victoria's body. The story fell apart. The police then focused on Fabian Gonzalez. His criminal record, his relationship with Michelle, his erratic behavior, he was the perfect target. But his phone's location record showed he wasn't in the apartment at the estimated time of the crime. Jessica Kelly was, and she wasn't alone. The scene was beginning to turn into a puzzle. The DNA found on Victoria's body belonged to a fourth individual, a man whom no one had identified until then, a stranger who had been in the house that night and who disappeared without a trace. The police began to call this profile John Doe. It was the name given to ghosts in faceless cases, and that ghost became the invisible linchpin of the entire investigation. Meanwhile, the media turned the tragedy into a national spectacle.